Hey everybody, my name is David Brennan. Welcome back to SaaS Founder Story. Today I have Francis Brero. He's the co-founder at MadKudu. Welcome to the show, man. Tell me a little bit about MadKudu.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. MadKudu, we're an AI copilot that's designed for B2B sales revenue teams to be able to prioritize their time effectively and remove a lot of the drudgery of prospecting that exists out there.
Very cool. And so how did you guys actually get into that?
Interestingly, our previous startup was a data science tool for B2C companies. And so we had a lot of data science and machine learning in our product, but I quickly came to realize that our go-to-market side of the organization lacked a lot of, like data literacy. And I realized very quickly that was the case for most companies that couldn't afford data science teams just for go-to-market. And so we realized there was a nice opportunity there that could combine our data science skills along with our passion for sales. And so that's kind of how we started MadKudu, and took it from there.
So where are you guys at now from a growth standpoint?
Yeah, so right now we have people a little bit all around the world. We were fortunate enough to raise a significant round back in late 2022, where we had kind of when the market was starting to go down, and we had more of the European economics where we had good burn multiples, good revenue per employees, and all of a sudden the not growing at all costs seemed like a great way to build a business. So that's where we were, and now we're spending more time on figuring out how to use the product more to run distribution. I'm a strong believer that AI is changing the concept of moats in startups, and I think it is going to be harder and harder to maintain a technical moat. And I believe that distribution moats are actually more interesting than ever. So figuring out how the product can contribute to that distribution moat is something that's really critical for companies to think about.
I totally agree with that. I was chatting with a friend of mine the other day, and we were just like, I don't think anybody's safe anymore when it comes to a technology moat with the way, and I mean, you and I are going to get into this conversation about AI tools, but the way things have changed, conversation we were having is who are the incumbents right now that have massive architecture setups that are human first, that you can go in and build AI first tools to take their market share from. And we're not the only ones. So let's talk about those tools, man. What are you guys currently using for sales at MadKudu?
So on the sales side, obviously we use MadKudu to automate a lot of the account research that we do. We're big users of Gong, like call recording and call intelligence, not only on the sales side, but also on the product side. It's really helpful for all the PMs to be able to log into Gong and to hear what the customer is saying, like how they describe something, how they talk about the problem that they're running into. So it's something that we factor into all of our product briefs. So when we're kind of planning for the next development cycle, we take on a lot of these snippets, share them with the engineering team. And it helps actually infuse customer centricity across the org. So the fact it can detect specific topics and surface them easily by email, it's avoids me going through all the calls to find information. So I'd say that's probably the biggest one. I mean, MadKudu, of course, and then Gong are probably the two biggest AI tools on the sell side.
That's really interesting because one of the things we hear so much about people using it for sales. And I think obviously you're a CPO at MadKudu, so product is pretty important and you understand sales as well from past positions. But I think that's such an overlooked use case. If you try and go in and do research on a customer or customers, the amount of data you have to go through to try and understand what their problems are, who they are, where you can connect any tool that actually does this, go in and take those recordings, pull out the pain points, pull out the challenges, their language, their frustrations. Super powerful the way to use AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much valuable information in there. Customers are the ones who know how to talk about your product, when we're even on the marketing side, when we're thinking about category creation and how do we position what we do. I mean, at the end of the day, listen to what your customers are saying about your product and just rehash that rather than try and, brainstorm for hours in an ivory tower. I feel like that's the main thing. I find a lot of product team and sometimes marketing teams are in their ivory tower of this is how the market should think about what we're doing and this is how they should purchase. And tools like call recording brings you back down to earth as to this is where the customer is, this is where the prospect is, this is how they think about the problem. Let's meet them where they are rather than try and push them to somewhere we think they ought to be.
Yeah. Such a strong way to deal with it. So tell me a little bit about development before we jumped on and started recording. You were telling me about moving from GitHub to Cursor.
Yeah.
Why? What did you like? What did you not like? What made you make the move? What do you see for gain?
I think there's a couple things that have been really interesting. I think Cursor has been doing better marketing. So I personally am still just operating the transition away from Copilot to Cursor, whereas the rest of the engineering team is completely shifted, and my CTO is fully bought into to Cursor. Some of the things that work really well, the agentic mode is really interesting. And the ability to feed it internal documentation has been incredible. So one of the things that we do is we'll feed our Cursor instance, architecture documentation, product documentation, so that we have it at this point able to solve a lot of our, call it like fairly simple bugs that we might run into, because it understands, it has access to the code base, of course, but then it also has access to the documentation, so it can determine what is expected behavior, desired behavior, and from there, it can infer a lot. I think that something happened when we realized that we could provide Cursor with this internal knowledge, and we're kind of like slowly thinking about how do we make essentially Cursor the equivalent of some of the, long tenured engineers at the company who have all of this kind of tribal knowledge, like trying to document all of this and make that tribal knowledge something that is almost the baseline for everyone, because it's embedded into our development, our IDE. So I think that's been a big one. And the interface I think is really good. I think Copilot came out with Copilot Chat, agentic mode they just announced. I feel like they're always one step slightly behind, but ultimately I will say what's been really interesting, and we were talking about this with like the concept of not having moats. What is very clear is that switching from Cursor back to Git to VS Code and Copilot, or the other way around, is likely going to happen 2 or 3 times this year. I'm convinced that there's no cost really in switching from one development environment to another, the same way that using Sonnet as your base LLM versus GPT, who cares, right? It's it's abstracted through the layers. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges for technical products, I think, tomorrow, is like building a moat, because it's so easy to switch from one tool to another and just like go on to the one that's just been released. It's a little bit more powerful, and so on and so forth.
Well, and I think that like sets us up for some really interesting tech races, where you're just like, where it really is about who can innovate the fastest and who can get it out. I mean, how fast can you push code? How fast can you iterate? How fast can you bring new products? It's going to be really interesting to see how that goes. I want to jump back to Cursor there for a second, because I think that's really interesting where you said about like adding context into it. And I just wanted a little clarification, because I understand putting code in, and of course, like your notes on your architecture and stuff like that, but are you adding actual functionality documents that you might use for describing how to build the project in there as well?
Yeah, so there are a couple things that we do. And so for those who haven't spent time reading about this, like Anthropic, I think it was a couple months ago, I think it was in November or so, they introduced this concept of, they call it model context protocol. So they were kind of creating a protocol for people to be able to upload like either code repositories, like documents, any kind of information. And so essentially, yes, we are uploading essentially Notion documents that contain our architecture, contain our product documentation. We even link to our help center. So we're feeding all of that information into Cursor to its base knowledge. And then, so that's really on the existing code. I think what's been interesting is even looking at how we've started shipping prototypes a lot faster at MadKudu. We have a layer where we'll use a specific model to generate a PRD based on a bunch of context that we give it, then generate a TRD from that, and then feed both of those documents to Cursor to start generating the project itself.
Just quickly, give us the acronyms for people
Oh,
that
sorry.
don't.
Yeah.
No worries.
So it's product requirement document is the PRD. So that's where it's kind of the brief where you define what is the user story, what you want to be able to accomplish with the feature, what should it kind of look and feel like. And the TRD is the technical requirement document, where you're starting to specify what are some of the more architectural pieces of the functionality, like where do you need APIs, what should the APIs do, where should they live, how should they communicate with other systems, and then you essentially feed that. You're really giving the blueprint or really the architecture of what you're trying to build, and then you let Cursor do the job of writing the actual code. I think what's really interesting is we're moving the same way that, you would go to, like when I went to school, right? We learned how to do assembly code and C, like very, very low level code. And then in my day to day, I'm really only doing Python, which has a lot of things abstracted. Like when I want to do an addition, I don't have to code like how, like at a bit level, you do an addition. I think what's happening with the AI is that we're taking this one level higher where you don't even need to think about how to write the code. You just need to think about like, what are the concepts that you want to use and what are the concepts that you want to bring together. And for us, it's been just incredible, the velocity that we've gained and how quickly we can ship prototypes for the marketing team, for the sales team. Like every team at MadKudu is using this to ship faster and to solve problems faster.
Yep. Are you using AI to create those documents now?
Yes. And that's where we found the most value with the reasoning models. I think one of the big learnings from my end, at least in using reasoning models, so that's the O3, the deep think from DeepSeek, is those operate really, really well when you do a one-shot prompt. So you don't want to interact with them in a chat manner like you would with the regular chatbots. You want to have a pretty substantial prompt of, this is what I want to build, and you structure your prompt really well. Give that to the reasoning model in asking, give me a PRD and a TRD. They'll do a really good job of giving you that. And then you can take those and give the code execution to, again, either a reasoning model, but if you don't want to spend that money, you can give it to a regular model, and it does a pretty good job. I think the interaction has been really interesting to see. As soon as you start trying to do chat with a reasoning model, it doesn't perform as well.
Yeah, it's really designed to give you that response, that one single response, and really powerful. How do you find the comparison between like O1 or O3 and the DeepSeek model?
It's a good question, and I haven't compared them fairly enough, I think, because I run R1, which is a DeepSeek model, locally on my end. And I think on that front, the main difference is that I don't have O1 to run locally, right? It's not open source. So that's number one, right? Like the fact that DeepSeek has a model that you can run through Grok or through any kind of inference site, or that you can run on your local machine, is just incredible, because it gives you the ability to play around with it, to test it a lot more. Then looking at the web hosted versions, I think I'm a little bit less confident in sharing, somewhat confidential data with DeepSeek than I am with OpenAI, because when you're on the paid plan. So I think there's a limitation there where I haven't, like on the basic stuff where there's no confidential information, I find that DeepSeek is a little bit faster. And I like their web search interface a little bit better. They're better at finding more obscure websites. Like when I do research on particular accounts, or I'm trying to figure out how to reach out to a company, I find that they'll find nuggets of information that are a little bit better than ChatGPT or the O models. And then from a code generation perspective, I found that O3 works really well, but again, you have to go through OpenAI, whereas R1, I love the fact that I can run it on my machine and generate code from there.
So I got two questions for you. Going forward into 2024, what do you see as the main strategy for you guys? What do you think you're going to be bringing in? What do you see happening?
Yeah, 2025, you mean, right? Like things are moving so fast that we're even like skipping the years, right?
I've lost years now. Oh, that's awesome.
I know, right? Things are moving too fast. I think that's one of the things, right? Trying to build year-long plans, I think, is impossible. Things are just changing too fast. The biggest change that we're operating at MadKudu is, as quickly as possible, we need to truly become AI native. And so that means that trying to get everyone to think about their day-to-day and their like weekly tasks through the lens of, what will I still be doing 3 months from now? What are things that I could delegate to anyone? And if you can delegate it to someone, you can delegate it to an AI. It just requires a bit of patience and a lot of rigor in describing what is it you actually want, which I find super interesting, because it forces people to think about what is it they're actually looking for, rather than just punting something away at team members. But so that's the biggest change, is really like getting the entire organization to a point where, deeply ingrained in our processes and our way of working, we are AI centric. And so on the engineering side, what's really interesting is that it changes the way we operate, where we're no longer thinking about writing code, we're thinking about architecture documents. On the support side, we have to think about when we're writing documentation, we're not writing it to be read by a human being. We're writing it to be read by an LLM, which means that images are not a good thing to do. Images are great for humans because an image is worth 1,000 words, but for an LLM, you actually want the 1,000 words. And so it changes the way you think about how do we document, how do we write customer-facing documentation, product-facing documentation through the lens of this has to be digested by AI agents who are going to be doing the work. It might seem minor, but it's a pretty substantial mind shift that is harder for some people to operate. I think they get it, but they're not fully able to project yet into this world where we're conversing and we're interacting with AI agents first. And that's who we're delegating a lot of the work to.
Well, that's perfect. So what's your one takeaway if there was a founders listening that they should change, start focusing on for this year in their company to help them not get lost in the AI race, I'll say, or run?
I think the biggest one is to not overthink it. I would say promote in some way, shape, or form, sharing use cases that people have with AI. So I run weekly hackathons within the organization. 1 week is going to be with the go-to-market team, 1 week with the product team. And a big element of that is just getting people to realize that the barrier to shipping something is not that high. And the barrier to getting something meaningful and valuable out of an LLM isn't that high. And just, you have to build that muscle. It's something that people aren't used to. And not everyone, I think, is in that kind of founder mode of like able to just take in the chaos and enjoy it and make sense of it. And so you have to, bring the team to embrace this change. And that can be through guided either exercises or showcases or demos of saying, hey, like CS team, why don't we try using AI to do this? Or like, hey, CS team, we got this question from a customer. Let's think about like, how would we generate a response with AI? Like all those things to start seeing, like, I think what people forget is like the law of, compounding interest, right? If you're 1% better every day, you end up at the end of the year 37 times better than you started. And it doesn't have to be every day I need to do something with AI that's going to make me 2 times better. No, just 1% better. And if you do that every day, you end up with a massive change at the end. And I think that's probably the one takeaway is like, get your team to understand that it doesn't have to be a transformation overnight. You have to start practicing, and practice makes perfect. And if you never start, you're going to be left behind.
Well, that is a great place to end the show. Thank you, Francis, for coming on and sharing. That was amazing. There is multiple takeaways that I'm going to use. So thank you very much. And I'm sure everyone else is going to love to learn from you. Have an amazing day, and thanks again.
Love it. Thanks a ton.